see straight down from the side of the bus. This rugged scenery had more daring, more energy, more resistance and wild beauty than anything I had seen in Kentucky or West Virginia. From the top of the mountain, descending to Valley Crucis, the bus driver lowered the gear, applying the brakes frequently, and continued to lower the gear. I clung desperately to the baggage racks and leaned heavily against the side of the seat to keep from being plunged headlong into the aisle. Although I was frightened by the roughness of the descent and the depth into the valleys below the road, I consoled myself with the thought that the bus made this trip every day and that I might reasonably expect it to make it this day as well. Near the foot of the mountain, the road had been built into a double hairpin curve so sharp that one could look straight up and see where he had been, and straight down and see where he was going at the same time. A year or two after I had been in Boone, one bus driver coming down the mountain slid off the road, but managed so skillfully to land below that he was headed in the right direction and nobody was injured. As we came up a long, gently sloping hill toward a gap in the mountains, I saw on the side of a barn an advertisement for Stallings Jewelry Store in Boone. Soon we had passed through the gap, and there found out below us was Boone, quiet and mystical in that half hour of deepening shadow that precedes the turning on of streetlights. Cratis arrived on campus with no luggage, just the suitcase with his dirty clothes and a bathrobe. He was placed in a single empty dorm room in Newland Hall with no sheets, no blanket, no towel, and no soap. Classes began the next morning.
He got to the school, met with Mr. Way late. Mr. Way was introducing the new teachers. He has introduced a Miss Penix, who is quite lovely. He said the other homeroom teacher for senior boys, is our new English teacher, who is taking Mrs. Rivers' place. He will have charge of dramatics this year. Girls, he is married. Mr. Williams, stand up. I stood up at the end of the row of seats and turned to face the student body. The boys left from my homeroom sent up a chorus of groans. As the student body looked me over, others joined in the chorus. Then a chant to a rhythmical stamping of feet began. No, stamp, stamp. No, stamp, stamp. No, stamp, stamp. It was like a cheering squad attempting to frustrate the player on the visiting team who was about to make a basket in a basketball game. I stood quietly, waiting for the protest to subside. Mr. Wade flung out his arm again and chided the students for the bad manners they were using in responding to a stranger in their midst. I smiled, bowed slightly, announced that I was pleased to be there, regretted intensely that I did not have Miss Poole's beauty and charm, but that I was sure the senior girls who liked cute, short men would have loved to have me for their homeroom teacher. I paused and some of the girls began to applaud. I bowed toward them and smiled. Then the applause increased. After a moment or two, I held up my hand for quiet, announced my room number, and read off the names of the boys in a chant similar to that used by the old-time railroad porters in announcing the cities at which the train now on the tracks would stop. When I sat down, the students gave me a round of good sport applause. I felt that I had saved myself. Entering his class, there were 28 8th grade English students, most of them 13 and 14 years old. I announced the section number and room number, wrote on the blackboard my name, pronounced it for them, and asked them to sign the roll I had passed around. I asked them each to hold up a hand as I called the roll and to correct me if I mispronounced the name. There were Cooks, Greens, Greers, Hodges, Millers, Moretzes, Norrises, and Weinbargers among them. They were mostly bus students, quite quiet country children, many of whom were coming to town to school for the first time. I remembered what Mr. Way had said about the rough children from back in the mountains who had in the past driven off teachers they did not like. These children, so young and small, it seemed to me, to be in high school did not appear to be ferocious. Meeting another class, it describes its 8th grade English class. 19 girls and a thin little boy with frightened eyes took their seats. These were town children, those who had gone through the campus elementary school and actually lived in town or had ridden buses from less than 3 or 4 miles outside the town. They were not as shy as the first period section. Different family names were represented too. Austin, Carroll, Clausen, Smith, Wilson. But there were also Greens, Greers, Hodges, and Moretzes among them too. Polished a little brighter, a little better dressed, somewhat more sophisticated, and with less uneasiness in their eyes than those with the family names who had been in the morning class. There was a good group spirit among them. No doubt most of them had been in the same classes together since first grade. They buzzed and hummed among themselves as they followed the routines and procedures others had followed silently. There were 2 sets of identical twins among them, twins dressed alike and looking so much alike I was never able to distinguish Mary from Martha Austin or Mary Sue from Betty Lou, and the twins sat next to each other. I decided later in the year that either they swapped seats occasionally, or the one who was better prepared responded to my question without regard for the name that I had called. Other members of the class always laughed when I called on Martha while looking at Mary, or responded to Betty Lou when Mary Sue had been asked a question. Having met the other teachers, the conversation now turned toward the place, the discussion of the place, Boone, where they were now working.
They asked, what did I think of Boone and the school? Well, the town was quaint and charming. The high mountains were beautiful. Even the sky at night had an awesome depth, a mystery, a something that made a difference. I liked it. The school had not yet come out of the Depression, and there were makeshifts, but the new principal seemed a fair, sincere, and capable man. I walked to the post office, a beautiful little building on a hillock near the corner of Depot Street and King Street. It was built of native stone, slabs of which varied in color from one stone to another. Across the inside wall was a mural depicting Daniel Boone on his way to Kentucky. Daniel was wearing a hat rather than the usual coonskin cap. I then crossed the street to the corner by the bank and made my way to Belk's to purchase a blanket. From Belk's, I went to the 10-cent store on the corner to purchase other necessities. In 1940, a disastrous flood took out the East Tennessee and Western North Carolina Railroad, including the Tweetsie line that came through Boone. And Papa describes the evidence of that destruction in the text. Herman Wilcox served as the Linville River Railroad agent and manager of Western Union before acquiring the franchises for Greyhound, Queen City, and Trailway buses through Boone. He later acquired the depot property at 211 Depot Street and built the Rock Business Building that served for many years as Boone's transportation center, where he also established Wilcox Travel Agency.
Cratis describes again his quest for luggage. Then I went by the bus station to see whether my bags had arrived. They had not. But the station manager, who was not the same small man I talked with the preceding evening, but a middle-aged man with a large and completely bald head, said that they might be on the bus from Elizabethton that would arrive around the edge of dark. He was an extremely friendly, helpful man whose voice, when he turned and answered the telephone once or twice while we were talking, slid upward as if he were asking a question, even when he made simple statements. He pronounced Elizabethan as if it were a question, even though he placed heavy stress on Beth. He told me that my bags might have gone from Bluefield to Winston-Salem, etc., 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 and he would call. He then looked at my name on the copy of the slip of paper the older man had filled out, held it rather far in front of him, moved his glasses forward on his nose, and said, C-R-A-T-I-S, Cratis Williams. I pronounced the name for him. He made no comment about the unusual first name, but asked, "Where are you from, Dr. Williams?" Noting the complimentary title, never before uttered, but unwilling at the moment to go into my credentials. I responded I'd come to Boone from Huntington, West Virginia, but I'd grown up in Kentucky. "Oh, old Kentuck? What town in Kentuck?" When I answered I was from a little place called Blaine, about 20 miles west of Louisa in Lawrence County, he said, "Is that anywhere near Pikeville?" Louisa, I explained, is located at the forks of the Big Sandy River and about 90 miles down the river from Pikeville. He had relatives who had been in the drug business in Pikeville, along with some Greers who had gone up there from Kentuck from Watauga County. Had I ever heard of the Greer Drug Company? It dealt in roots and herbs. I had not. He then welcomed me to Boone and offered to help me any way he could. If I wanted to, I could call a little past 6 o'clock, since the bus from Elizabethan ordinarily made it on time, and ask whether my bags had come, unless I just wanted to walk back down. "My name is Herman Wilcox," he said, as he reached to shake my hand. There were a number of other notable characters that Cratis met during this first weeks and months. Herb Way, of course, was principal of the Appalachian Demonstration High School. Chapel Wilson was professor of education and psychology who developed the demonstration schools and called to hire Cratis. There was B.B. Dougherty, president of the college, who lived in the garage apartment next to the Dougherty house where the widow of his brother, D.D., lived.
One afternoon, I walked to the post office. On my way back to campus, I came to the corner of the Baptist church and then walked along College Street by the funeral home, Eagle Apartments, a boarding house on the corner at Howard Street, and past the Episcopal Church. Sitting on the stone wall in front of a beautiful little stone cottage with a profusion of flowers blooming in the front yard was a well-dressed old man with a wide, dark mustache, his glasses resting far down on his nose, and his blocked gray felt hat pulled so low on his forehead that a ring of baldness showed below it from behind. A prominent black mole or wart was visible in the lower part of one cheek. Immediately, I thought of Abraham Lincoln, Mahatma Gandhi, and a demented old bald-headed man with a wide mustache and a wart on the lower part of his cheek in my home community in Kentucky, who thought that he was the President of the United States. Standing in front of the man on the wall was another old man who said to me, "I would like for you to meet Mr. B.B. Dougherty, the President of the college." Among others that he met during this first period were Herman Eggers, the registrar of the college, J.D. Rankin, the dean of the college, and most significantly in many respects for his personal life, Amos Abrams, the chair of the English department, who in a kind of a combination of duties that's rarely seen on campuses these days, was not only chair of the English department, but also directed the cheerleaders, in addition to being a major collector of ballads and songs, and encouraged Papa's participation in that activity and the North Carolina Folklore Society.
Cratis describes his first meeting with Dean Rankin. He goes into his office, and Dean Rankin rose to shake hands with me, and they chatted for a while, and then he said, "Soon Dr. Abrams came bouncing into the office, through the door to the hall, rather than from the reception room. Dean Rankin and I both rose, and Dean Rankin introduced us. Dr. Abrams shook my hand with vigor, and we sat down. Dr. Abrams sliding far down into his chair and resting one spidery leg upon the other at the ankle, his long, slender foot wriggling up and down stiffly. I was shocked by the homeliness of this little man who appeared to be between 40 and 55 years old. He looked at me for a moment, his tiny blue eyes resting alternately on me and then searching for something on the ceiling. His glasses with large lenses hugging his face tightly, his nose bashed in and twisting slightly to one side, his mouth curling up gleefully under the shabbiest excuse for a mustache I had ever seen, and his chin trembling so fast that it appeared to be trying to escape from his face. Then his foot held rigidly in position, he said, "I want to tell you, sir, that I am mighty glad to have you join us. With you here, people can no longer say I am the ugliest man in the world." Okay. Yes. So traveling to Greensboro with Dr. Abrams, Cratis observed, quote, the trip had been an enriching one for me. I had learned why the region west of the Blue Ridge had been designated the Lost Provinces. I had seen the face of a new land. I had gained a deeper respect for Doc Abrams, and I was more proud than ever of Appalachian Teacher College. I was glad to be living and working in Boone. Cratis also describes a trip to Howard's Knob. Okay.
I walked to the courthouse square and turned up Water Street toward Howard's Knob. The road looped around the upper side of town, right around here, a section called Junaluska, in which the black population of Boone lived. Soon I saw a path across a field and followed it, panting heavily and resting frequently until I reached the road above. Let me insert a note here that when Sylvia was diagnosed with tuberculosis, they discovered a spot on Papa's lungs as well. So he was flirting with tuberculosis, and it caused shortness of breath and fatigue, which is what he's referring to here. Resting frequently until I reached the road above. The dirt road was not very steep for a way, but then ascended on a steep grade toward the saddle gap between Howard's Knob and Ridge Mountain. I rested when my heart began to pound and made it to the gap in perhaps 45 minutes from the time I'd left the apartments. The rutted old abandoned trail from the gap to the top of the knob looked as if it had not been used for many years. I was finding my way up there to locate a stop where one could sit alone, feel the fresh breeze whipping across his face, look at the town far below him, and think his deepest thoughts in strictest privacy. I thought. Beyond the end of the trail, I ran into surprises. Behind nearly every tree and rock was a young couple. Some were standing, some sitting, some reclining. They were college students who had slipped away from campus. Boys over one entrance to the administration building, girls over the other, segregated seating in the auditorium, 8 o'clock curfew in the evening, and other precautions did not prevent courting couples from coming together when they set their heads to do so. Feeling like an unwelcome intruder, I retreated from the scene and returned to the faculty apartments. Papa was invited to attend a Lions Club meeting in the dining room at the Daniel Boone Hotel. He later became a member and was recruited to organize a 1-hour fundraiser show. President Doherty would not give permission to use college facilities for that purpose, but the manager of the Appalachian Theater gave permission to use the theater for a performance on April 8th of that year.
Snow fell intermittently throughout the day, but it melted when it struck the warm spring earth. At 5:30, I began meeting with the, quote, actors for the show, helping them apply makeup, including mustaches and beards for some of them, supplied them with white cardboard top hats I had ordered for the show, and then had them ready for the stage by 7 o'clock. By then, a heavy, soft snow was falling so fast and remaining on the ground that we began to wonder whether the audience would get there. Since few people believed there could be a traffic snarling snow at that time of the year, the theater was packed. Excited by such a turnout, the actors were stimulated to do their best. The show, following no theme, included a scene in Dr. Sawbones' office in which two strapping fellows held a man with a broken leg on a table while Bill Matheson prepared to amputate the broken limb. The bottle of whiskey that a relative had brought for the patient to drink in order to withstand the ordeal was consumed with great gusto by the doctor and his helpers. Fortified by the spirits, the helpers laid hold of the struggling patient. Bill Matheson suddenly drew an enormous handsaw from under the table and was in the act of bringing it across the victim's leg when the curtain closed. Audience response was thunderous. Milt Greer, made up with lamb chop sideburns and a goatee and wearing a frock coat, delivered a marvelous folk sermon, which Doc Abrams had recorded at a rehearsal. One of the Cottrell twins and Aunt Jenny Critcher engaged in an almost naughty dialogue in the park. A quartet did a few barbershop numbers. Council Cook sang quite well 2 or 3 songs, including Lonesome Road. The show was a hit with the audience. By the time it was over, though, 8 inches of snow had accumulated. Everybody enjoyed the show. The Lions were elated. As he reached the end of the year, of that teaching year, Cratis recalls the boys in his homeroom class fondly. Boys in my homeroom were exceptionally considerate. First time to time, throughout the year, I would remember their response to me when From time to time throughout the year, I would remember their response to me when Mr. Way introduced me at the student assembly at the beginning of the term. Our relationship had been harmonious, warm, and fully trusting all year, even from our first meeting in the classroom. I soon know that their booing me when I was introduced was more of a humorous response to Mr. Way's high praise for lovely Miss Poole than a rejection of me. I found that they had a delightful sense of humor and an admirable capacity for enjoying one another. This esprit the group already had. I could take no credit for it. It had developed over the years. For most of those in the group had been together since they were in primary grades. And there's a lovely photograph on page 123 with the students in the homeroom. My homeroom group included Charles Boone, Kenneth Clay, Cecil Green, G.C. Green Jr., Hal Green, Ted Hageman, Rhonda Hardin, Fred Hodges, Roy Johnson, Roy Marsh, Randall Page, Walter Reagan, Reese Roberts, Phil Vance, Harold Watson, James Watson, and William Wilson. I believe there might have been 4 or 5 others whose names I have forgotten. At the end of the school year, after classes were over, he reported as required to his draft board in Louisa, Kentucky, having resigned from his position here at Appalachian.
At the station for checking out from the examination, we were given our classification cards. Mine was 4F. The clerk stamped in red ink on the back of my hand, "Rejected." I went to the telephone office and called Mr. Wade. He was still in his office at the school. I reported that I had been classified as 4F, and I would like to return to Boone if my position at the school were still open. No effort had been made to find a replacement for me, I was told, and I was invited to come back. I had come to Boone on a 1-year contract. I assured Mr. Wade that I would be returning for life if they could put up with me. Thank you.
I'm sure many of you have questions, but we also would love to hear your stories. Many of you have particular and unique experiences with Cratis, and that we would appreciate your sharing.
My twin sisters were in, I guess, one of the first classes.
Mary Martin.
There was Mary Martha.
And the story
Minnie Office.
of,
Stand up, Minnie.
See that, Minnie? Yeah.
I'm much younger. But Martha would have been here today, but she's not feeling well.
Oh.
But the stories that she's told me, one of the things that Cratis told them early on in the class was they do not have to dress alike. But not to do anything drastic, but just start with the beret and change berets. But they never did. They continued to dress alike. And another thing that she recalled, and when I was talking to her yesterday, was Cratis would often interject in class the backwardness that he had come from. She said he almost was obsessive with the fact that people were having to live under the circumstances that he had come from. That had lasted in her memory.
Yeah.
Right.
And particularly through the Depression.
Right.
Yes, please.
Well,
Hurry, stand up and talk that
I guess I can take one.
way.
Yes. We're one friends. My name's Murray Hawkinson, and I may be here in part because Cratis came to Boone, actually. I understand he introduced my parents, and this family was a part of our family every Christmas and for other holidays and occasions throughout my entire childhood, and continues to be in so many ways. And one of my memories is one of those Christmas celebrations. Cratis was a great storyteller, just beyond fabulous. And he was talking about some thing in Kentucky, but he whipped out a mason jar of whiskey that had been freshly made, I guess. And he brought back from a trip to Kentucky, I suppose. And he shared it with us as part of, I was too young to actually have it, but the families got a chance to take a little bit of a draft of that. But, it was always great, very fun. He's such a lively, bright intellect, and so self-effacing. I mean, it was just really fun to be around him. He shaped my life in many ways forever, I'm sure.
Thank you, Murray. I should interject, if I might, that Murray's father, Walter Hawkinson, from the math department, and my father were roommates in the faculty apartments for many years while they were still both single and dating. And when Walter started dating Martha, who became Martha Hawkinson, was about the same time that Papa started seeing Libby Lingerfeld in New York in the summers. And of course, they each eventually married in those directions, and we were the products. So thank you. Fred Cole, I should mention Fred's here, part of that family as well. Fred and Murray and Johnny and the Hawkinsons. I think that 35 years in a row, something like that, that we had Christmases.
Stand up, Fred.
Well, I can say the reason I'm in Boone is because Cratis introduced Uncle Walter to Aunt Martha. And Aunt Martha was my mother's sister. And as a little boy, I would come, and they lived in faculty apartments by then, and my Uncle Walter would sell tickets for Appalachian football games when it was down where the parking lot is now. And I remember he'd let me kind of sit down below him while he was selling tickets, but I enjoyed all these with Murray and David and Sophie and Johnny, the Christmas gatherings and so forth. But I've just got to say, my Uncle Walter and Cratis would sit over on the side together, and I don't know what they were talking about, but every now and then, and my Uncle Walter was kind of a dry wit person, and but I'd see him sit and laugh and laugh and laugh, and it was whatever Cratis had told him. And I always wished that I knew what they were talking about. And I don't think I ever knew. Maybe Murray knew, but anyhow, I have a great respect and love for Cratis Williams and his family too. So glad y'all are doing this today. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, Fred. And Fred is the proprietor of Fred's General Mercantile up in Banner Elm. I'm sorry, Beach Mountain. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, my parents, my father was in the Lions Club with Cratis, and I think that production or some other, did Cratis have more than one play at the Appalachian Theater?
With the Lions Club, I don't know.
Well, anyway, I can remember my mother dressing up. She had green in her hair, green some red feather or something, and she was in the play. If it was that one or another one, but Cratis was also, I knew him personally, and I also had him in college. And he was one of my favorite teachers. And he made me appreciate the language that some of the people spoke here, because it was not correct English. But he told me that it was the English they had when they came over here and they lived in the hollows, and they had retained it. So he made me appreciate. He was a wonderful person.
Thank you.
I too believe he's a wonderful person. One of the highlights of my 40 years at Appalachian State University was a trip to Florida that Cratis and I took to go to the Florida Education State Meeting to recruit students for the university or college at that particular time. And that 5 days was one of the highlights of my life, because just Cratis and myself, and he told stories, and we listened. We went actually and stayed with Herbert W. Way. Dr. Way had been here, but then when he didn't get the job as president of the school, he left and went to the University of Miami. And so therefore we went and stayed with Dr. Way in Miami, and had a wonderful, wonderful time. And Cratis told all these stories. But rooming with him in a motel was an interesting experience, because his wife had made his underwear out of flour sacks. Because something about the fact that it was certain conditions that they made with more sophisticated laundry or cloth would cause him to have a rash. So therefore, Debbie just decided she'd make this underwear. So therefore, that was a strange interest. But I could go on and on and on forever about Cratis and the things he was good at. But one of the things was, he was in Washington one time making a presentation to some organization in one of the office buildings. And he called, and he wanted some white liquor, moonshine, because he was going to make that was a part of his presentation and talking about the mountains of North Carolina and whatever. So he called, and I'll remember his name in just a moment. And I drove up there, went up there, took a quart of white liquor to Cratis up there so he could make that presentation in Washington. Cratis Williams was, I believe, the most intelligent and educated man I've ever known. He was a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful teacher.
Thank you, Don. Thank you, Don.
I think that was the meeting of the Appalachian Regional Commission.
There you go. You're exactly right. That's exactly right. I stand up and I forget things.
I knew Cratis later in his life in Libya, and of course everybody was grown. I married Murray, and was privileged to be at a lot of those Christmas and other things. And of course, after Cratis and Walter passed, Libby and Martha were such good friends, and was a therapist, a psychologist, and I somehow, one of the first people I came in contact during my professional career in therapy had told me that there was these really strange older women who came into Pepper's every week. I think they went maybe every Friday or something for lunch because they really liked the soup, the vegetable soup that Jack Pepper prepared. And she said, I can't remember the content while we were talking about this, but I immediately recognized, I didn't say anything, of course, but recognized this was Libby and Martha. Libby would always ask for a certain table and there'd be no linen on it, and she had a condition, a skin condition. Maybe she got it from Cratis. But anyway, it just made me realize, I'm from eastern North Carolina, that what a wonderful little town I was living in. It's not so little anymore, but that all these connections always came together. But one time, maybe the first time I met Cratis in Martha's house, and I don't know how many of you have ever been in Martha's house, but it was always kind of crowded, and Christmas was amazing. She told these people. But Cratis, I met him for the first time, and he was asking him my name and I was a sub from eastern North Carolina, and he immediately told me where my folks had come from. and he could do all of that just from my accent. And I didn't even think I had it. I thought I'd gotten over that. But he was an incredible person, and you're an incredible family. Glad to know you.
A gathering to talk about Cratis has to include, for newcomers, Pat and I didn't get here until, I'm Bob White, this is my wife. We didn't get here until 1974, so we got here as quick as we could, however. One of the great joys, of course, was getting to know and being involved with Cratis. And reference has been made to his stature here today. This man is a giant between and among the folks who study Appalachia. But he was a man of diminutive stature and a wonderful wit. I, too, would like to know what those stories were that he was telling, so you can hear about them. But I have one of my own. We got invited after we arrived here to Cratis' Christmas parties, which you've made reference to.
New Year's parties. Yes.
And they had become famous. He and Libby had a collection of Andrew's sisters and the Dorsey brothers, and the dancing was really a wonderful thing. And one of those parties, Cratis remarked to me, he said, "You know, I'm a man of short stature, and we're so glad you're here. Isn't it wonderful to dance with tall women?"
I have it on the best authority that another one of Cratis offspring does wear that flour sack.
I actually used them as shorts. I sewed up the fly and used them as shorts. They were quite interesting and remarked upon.
Betty, you want to wind us up by telling how you can?
Well, we came just a smidge before you all. John and I arrived at Appalachian in '71. John joined Rankin Hall, and it's a biologist, and I was in the history department over in Whitener. All these wonderful. You know, I read this book when it first came out, and put it great, put it up. Then we read it last month again in preparation for this, and all of a sudden it was a whole brand new book. You know, all of a sudden there were points in it that I was almost in tears. It was so sweet and so dear. But when we first got here, he found out that John and I were from Kentucky. He said, "Now, where are you from?" I said, "Well, I'm from Danville and John's from Versailles. Please don't say Versailles because you're not from here. If you don't, it's Versailles. It's not Versailles. It's Versailles." So, and actually none say, right? I said. But anyway, he said, "Now," and I said, he said, "And now, tell me about your family." And so I said, "Well, John's brother, in fact, is dating a girl from Louisa." He said, "Oh, really? Tell me now, what is her name? What's her son?" I said, "Well, she's a chief." And he said, "I used to date her mother." And so I said, it's like your experience. And so he said, now that, of course, that means now if John's brother is dating a chief and you and I meet, he said, that must mean that we're cousins. I don't think there's any way that you could figure out how anybody from Kentucky was, of course, his cousin. But you know, we've been talking about such specific spaces and places and people, but he had such an international reputation. And I'm sure Bobby remembers this because he probably gave me the money to do it. I was always going to Bonnie Sneed's office and I just need $50, all I need. Because in 1976, I was back from, I had a Fulbright in India. And many Indians ended up coming here. In fact, Roy Carroll refused to let me go to China because he said, I can't. So this man who was coming from India, his name was Pilal. He's a Brahmin scholar. And he's about this tall. He's gorgeous. And he's tall, wonderful, elegant man. And so he was coming to visit us in the history department. And so I said, wouldn't it be fun to get Cratis of diminutive stature with this? And so we were over in the old student union in that upstairs sitting area. And I invited my classes and anybody else's class to come to see Cratis Williams and Pilal have tea at 4 o'clock on this day. What I regret is that I didn't, this is before we were videotaping. I don't even think videotaping is anything. But Cratis appears, Pilal appears. I had set a table with cups and I found my mother's tea. And so we had tea. And so there was no program. I just invited us to come and observe these two wonderful scholars together. And so they knew a little bit about each other. So Cratis started the ball rolling. He said, no, tell me about yourself. Where were you born? It's the same questions he asked all of us, right? Where were you from? And so they exchanged this. And the next thing I know is Cratis was asking him, sing me a song from your youth. Well, it turned out to be like a beautiful voice. The rest of the time, they sat, every time I tell the story, they sat there and sang for each other. It was magic. The inclusive nature of Cratis, the way he connected with people and made us all, we're all just cousins. And I know that Dr. Henry Gates on Finding Your Roots was like, yeah, of course that's possible. Of course you're his cousin. Of course we're all cousins. And that's what I think Cratis for most of all is that inclusiveness that we all had because of him. And I love your statement in the book. You know, he's gone, but we don't laugh as much as we used to now that Cratis is gone. Thank you all for coming today. This has been a wonderful wonderful experience for all of us.
Thank you.
Nice to see you.
It's good to see you.
Thank you.